Hello there, and welcome to the first video of our NVIDIA Omniverse basic training. This is the first lesson of the basic level for NVIDIA Omniverse. If you are totally new to Omniverse, I recommend you go first through my introductory training. This one, I will be sharing this reproduction list in the description of the video. But for today, in this lesson, we are going to build a factory scene, and to do so, we will reference several other smaller USD files that we will call components, and we will build one of these components. The others will be given to us. So we are going to be working today with using USDComposer application, and we will see how the structure of a project looks like with the asset that we are going to download with the link that I will be sharing in the description of the video as well. And we will get hands on creating different layers and understand their use. We will learn to store and organize materials in a custom library. We will also be using variants and see how do we use them. And finally, we will be referencing the component that we just created and the other components that have been given to us to build our whole factory, and doing some small exercises with it. So without further ado, let's go for it. The first thing we are going to do is to launch our USDComposer application. We will be using USDComposer for this lab. And while it is opening, you can see in the description of the video a link to download this zip file, which contains all the assets that we will be using in this lesson. In the lesson number 4, we used a factory sample for practice. Now we are going to learn how to build that scene using different assets, different USD files, and making references to them. Unzip the folder and save this folder in your project folder. You can save the latest one, so save this folder wherever you want. Just keep in mind, since we are going to use references to the USD files within that folder, if you move the folder to a different location, the references will not work anymore in the USD file that we are about to create now. Now I have my USDComposer opened. Let's remember a bit about some navigation concepts. Use your mouse to move around the viewport. This is the viewport where you can see your visual state. This is the tree of our state with all the assets that Omniverse calls prims. If you click the middle button of your mouse, you can, and you hold it, you can translate through the scene. If you hold the right button of your mouse, you can see around. Let's create a mesh. Let's create a sphere. The sphere will appear in your stage tree. You can select the sphere. If you go away, you can select the sphere and click F for Fox. Then you center the sphere in your viewport environment. If I have the sphere selected, you can keep the key Alt pressed hold the left button of your mouse, and then you can rotate, keeping the prim in the middle of your viewport. This is pretty useful, as you will see once you got some practice. If you hold the right button of your mouse, you can also use uh, these key buttons to fly around. You can zoom in, zoom out with the WS, and you can use the key buttons of your keyboard to navigate through the scene. Another thing we are going to do is to move the stage tab side to side, keeping the layers here and the stage here, because we will be working with the tree and the layers in this lab. Now we are going to prepare the first asset we want to use in our project. The asset is going to be a welding locker. This is the welding locker we are going to represent, which is a controls cabinet for QCAD robots. We are going to divide the asset in multiple layers, like that. That will allow us to work individually in the features that we want, making big projects much more manageable, since we will be just loading the parts of the assets that we want to work with. And this is the final structure that we will have, dividing the payload in 3 different features and using references to the materials, instead loading the materials directly in the file. As you can see, we have multiple formats of USD files. USDA is the text format readable by humans. USD is the old binary format, legacy format for Omniverse, still useful for local practice and still working. USDZ is the new binary format, much more efficient, much more fast. And USDZ is the compressed file format for VR applications. Here you have a summary table with the different types of formats. And for this lab, we will be working with USDA and USDC. Now let's go into create the base of our first asset. Let's go and create a new file. From stage template, select empty. We don't save our actual scene. We are creating it empty because this is going to be a reusable component and we don't want lighting or ground existing in the component. Add a gray studio light rig from the lighting widget on the top right of your viewport, so we can see the prims in the scene even without lighting. Okay, otherwise, if you don't have lights and you keep it lights off, if you add any item here, you will not see it. So we select Gray Studio. Go and save it. I'm going to select in my folder where I have my lab assets. Go to assets, and in welding locker I'm going to save this file as USDA, and I'm going to call it content. So this will be our component with the content of all our layers. Save it. Now, in our welding local folder, we have our new empty content file with the geometry USDC file which have been given to us. This is the current component structure. Now in our content file we are going to add, so this is our content file, we are going to add the geometry file as a sublayer. Remember, this is the final component structure we want to achieve. Let's insert right button on the root layer, insert sublayer, go to the assets, welding local folder, and select the geometry USDC file. Now we have added the geometry USD file as a sublayer of our content empty file. As you can see, the orientation of our geometry file is not matching our content file orientation. So to fix that, click on the root layer, go down to the property tab and change the world axis to Z. If you select geometry with the Alt button, you can rotate and you can see that it is standing up. Now let's go and create a second sublayer. This time we are going to create a brand new sublayer. We're going to call it looks. It's going to be a USDC. Save it. This sublayer is going to contain all the materials that we are going to be using in our component. Let's make this sublayer the authorization layer. You can right button in your mouse and set authorization layer, or you can just double click on the layer. Now it is highlighted green. Any changes that we make now in our state will be saved specifically in this sublayer. Now we are going to reference the materials, but to make them more organized in our project, let's create a new material library. Go to the Materials tab, go to the gear icon, add collection, search for the material folder in your lab assets, select materials sample, then select. Now we have a new folder here with the materials that we want to use in our custom component. Let's go and add the materials that we want for this component. You can pick and drop them in our state. Make sure that you have the look sublayer selected, and let's do the same for these other materials. Metal car body, that one, orange paint, red paint, blue tape. Maybe you have this issue as well, that the material is not rendering properly here. These assets are pretty old and something might have changed, but don't worry too much about that. Now we are going to be adding each material to its uh, prim. So if we go, for example, for you extend the geometry. These are all the meshes that we want to give some color. So for the plug, we are going to use the blue tape. You can just pick and drop. Oh no, I'm going to remove that. Sorry. If you go to the plug mesh, here you will see materials on selected models. And then here we can search for the blue tape. And now for the accents, we are going to use the red paint. Here you can see that we are giving some color to our component. And we are going to do the same for all these elements. I'm setting here the list of materials per element. So for the distancer, just metal car body. For the screen, metal car body 2. For the plastic, black paint. For the bracket, metal car body. For the exterior, black paint. Okay, so we have our model totally painted. If you want to use any material from here because you want to give a more similar color than the ones provided by our assets, you can look for another orange here. Let's go for this one, for example. When you have this arrow, orange arrow here, it's because it's a reference. If you don't have the arrow, it's because we are saving the material directly in our USD file. So for example, if I go to the door and I change the material to this one, sorry, I just select the door. That one, that looks a bit better. If you go to any of the layers and click right button, edit, you will see in a JSON-like format the structure of your layer. This is your state. Feel free to have a look on the structure of the layer. You can even make some manual changes here and see how they affect. Anything that you change here will be automatically reflected in your scene. And once you want to finish to edit your layer, go back to the layer, select finish editing, and now you go back, you can see that we are not online, to say something, with your project. So let's go back to USDComposer. Now we've completed the content file with layers for material and geometry. And now let's create our final component, the one that we will be using in our bigger project. So go to File, New From State, Empty. I'm going to save just in case. Please note, when I saved, you can choose which layers do you want to save. So you make changes in different layers, you can choose to save only the changes in one of the layers. Big Gray Studio, and let's save the file directly. We're going to save this file in the Assets folder. And we're going to call this file welding loca, and it's going to be USDA, so we can open it for editing if we want. Save it. So this is the final component, basically the final structure of our component. Basically, in the assets folder, we will have the welding local component that we will be reusing in our final project. This component still, we need to make the references to subcomponents. So basically, everything within that component will be calling the items that we have in the welding local folder. And in the welding local folder, we have several layers, and the looks layer is referencing materials. So this is the final structure of our component. Now we are going to add two new elements, which are assets interface, that will allow us to add some metadata to the component, and then we will add payload. This will enable us to choose to load the full component or just the asset interface. This is useful for large scenes when you want to focus on specific features and you want to reduce the memory footprint of the scene. First thing we have to do in our final component is to adjust the orientation as we did before with the content file. So selecting the root layer, go down to world axis and change it to Z. Then let's change the name of the world Xform in the state. This will allow us to recognize the component when we reuse it in a bigger project. And let's call it welding locker. Now we have an Xform. Well, we already had it. And now let's add the payload. From the state, right click in the welding locker Xform and then add payload. And now we select the content USD. Select. Now we can see the local in the state. If we select the local and then we rotate. Okay. Now let's add some metadata. Right button in the welding local, add attribute, and let's add 1 second. For example, model number, type asset, and that's it. Now, in the property section, if you go down in the raw USD properties, you have a new attribute, model number, for example. Let's save the file, save, and now this is our component structure. As you can see, now we added the payload. The payload will be happening from the content file to our welding local USDA file. The content USDA will have the two sublayers for looks and geometry, and the looks sublayer will have the reference to materials. Now we are going to work with variants. Let's go to open the content USD. From the welding local folder, select the content file, double click. Now from the first, if we go to the options here, let's add the variant column. Here, sorry. And now we already have the looks as authorization layer, but if you don't, just set it as authorizing layer. Now we are going to see how to create variants for the USD component. From the stage, select the world Xform. Right click and select edit variants. This will open the variant editor for this prim for the world Xform. Let's add a new variant set. Let's call it painted. With painted selected, click add print and select the door. For example, select. Then add property, select material, and we keep the orange that we had. This yellow button means that there is some local change that will override this variant. If we click on it, the variant will take priority. Take note that layers has always priority. and variants will be overridable by any changes directly in the layers. So let's create a second variant. Right click in the painted, select duplicate variant. Let's call it this one steel, and let's select metal car body, orange, and metal car body. Perfect. Now close the variant editor window, and now you can see here that you have already the two variants, and you can switch between both of them. Save the file. This will save these variants, and if we reuse this file in another USD file, in the final component, the two variants will be included on them. Now let's go and open our final component. Let's go to Assets, Welding Loca, double click. Now as you can see, we have here the variants, but if I disconnect the payload, obviously because the payload was charging the content USD file, if I disconnect the payload, the variants are disappearing. So now with the payload unchecked, let's go with the right button, edit variants, and let's go to add just the variants with the same name, painted, and steel. Now here we have the variants. If I keep the steel, when I go to the payload, we still have the steel here. If I change the variant with the payload unchecked, if I check it again, we have it painted. So that's how we can use the specific variant without loading the component. So we use only the metadata, and we reduce the footprint of the project. Now let's going to set up the stage to build a factory layout where we will be using this new component and others. So let's go and create a new file, empty. I'm going to save that. This time we will leave it as stage light instead of Gray Studio, because we are going to add some components with lights. Let's go and do the same for the orientation. So selecting the root layer, select the world axis as Z. Let's go and save this file in the projects folder, factory layout folder, and let's call this file factory layout USDA. Factory layer. Save it. And now from the layer tab, let's go and insert a new sublayer. Or let's go and create a new sublayer. Building. Save it. Don't transfer. Let's this sublayer as the authoring layer. From the stage panel, let's create a scope. Let me move this a bit. Right button, create a new scope. These are only folders to have the things a little bit more organized. Building. Now, right button, add a reference. Navigate to assemblies. And select factory. This will add the building that we will be using to add our cell station. If you open the building scope and you unchecked the payload for the roof, will be easier to work with without the roof. Now we're going to create another sublayer to contain our equipment geometry. So right button in the root layer, create sublayer. Let's call it equipment. Equipment. USDA. Save it. Make it the authoring layer. Let's create another scope here. Let's call it equipment as well. We will use this scope to group all our equipment together. Right click in equipment, create an X form. We're going to call it lockers. Now let's add our reference. And select lockers. This will add 4 lockers like the component that we created before. If you see this lockers has a reference to the welding locker, and each one has the variant that we created before. If you are seeing these references or any reference in red, this is because there is an issue with the reference. First thing we have to check is the path of the reference. So if you select the X form and go to references, make sure that this path is the correct and the final name with the extension is matching the name and extension and path of the file. Now let's go and add the workway. So right click in equipment, create a new X form. Let's call it workway. And let's make a reference, add, create, add reference. Assets. No, in assemblies, that one. Factory floor workways. Okay, these are the floor for the factory. Now let's go and add the hood track. Again, right click, create, Xform, hood track, right click, add reference. You have the hood track selected from here, so make sure to select the whole Xform, the parent one, not just one of the sub Xforms. Just select the parent one. You can move it away or put it in whatever you prefer. Now let's go and add the welding line. Again, right click, create, Xforms. See that all these are references, so any changes that we make in the reference file will affect the whole project. welding line, add reference, is in assets, welding assembly, animated, that one. Okay, let's move the lockers. They're in the middle, and the hood track. Well, the hood track is okay there. Oh no, it's in the middle of the car. Let's move it here, for example. Maybe let's rotate the welding line because it's in the middle of the column. So if you select the whole X-form here and rotate, we're going to rotate in the Z axis 90 degrees. Now let's move again the hood track. I'm going to leave it there for now. And I don't know where the lockers are here. These are the cabinets of these robots. Now let's go and save the file for now. So now we have the building structure and its lighting. We have 4 pieces of equipment. In the lockers one, we have references to the component that we have been creating in this lesson. And all of this is on this equipment layer. Now, if you set the root, sorry, if you set the root layer as the authoring layer, now you can mute each layer individually, and you will see only the things specific for each layer. So you can work only with the things that you want to modify without having the whole environment or any other items annoying you in your work. Now, to finalize, let's do a small exercise just to experiment with layers. Let's go and create a new layer, a new sublayer. Let's call it layout 1. Here's the A. Save it. Make it the layout 1 sublayer, the authoring layer. Now in this one, we are going to select the lockers all the lockers, and let's go and move it to the corner, and let's save it. Now let's go and create another sublayer from the root layer. Layout 2. Save. And make it the authoring layer. In this one, we are going to rotate the lockers. So if I have the select the lockers left X form and let's rotate it, and you can make any change you want. This is just to have a bit of experience. How do we use layers? Save it. Now, if you make the root layer the authoring layer, if we remove the if we mute the layer with the layout 2, we are removing the we are removing the rotation. If we mute the first layer with the translation, so changing the position the lockers, we are leaving the lockers back where they were at the beginning. Now if we unmute the layer 2, we are just doing even if when we make this rotation when the lockers were close to the wall, because the only modification we made in this layout was the rotation, now we are only doing the rotation in the root layer. So that's how we can create multiple layouts or configuration in the same project. And that's all for this lesson. I hope you like it, and see you in the next one.